All right, so it's such a joy to have us together here today. I'm going to be taking us, on this journey. It's a primer, as it were, a primer on critical thinking and creative thinking. Again, I find so much joy doing this. That's because ever since I started on this journey, I started on this journey not intentionally. It was almost a mistake, but it started in 2004, right? So that's about 19 years ago, right, that I started on this journey. It started not intentionally, but then what happened was I had to take the SAT, right, because I wanted to school in the US. And because of that, the SAT was like the equivalent to JAMB, right, in the US. Interestingly, when we began to study for the exams, I discovered that first of all, these exams were not about physics or chemistry or biology. So I began to try to understand why would America, want to get people into university and they are not testing you for subject matter, competence, things like chemistry, things like history and all of that. Rather, they were testing you on aptitude. So I kept thinking about this. And when I was done with the exams, I discovered that the way I began to think was entirely different. Like I had shifted in how I was thinking. So I needed to now pay attention to it. And that's another thing. Observation is something very critical, right? Like being able to observe, being able to identify inflection points, being able to identify the little things that make the difference is always a major thing, as we progress in life. So I observed that and then I doubled down on it. So I began to read more materials that were basically about sharpening my aptitude. So it was years later, I came to discover that the term for it was critical thinking. And then, creative thinking was still more, common. I could still relate with that better than critical thinking. And then I discovered that basically the reason why we have a huge gap in, and I think I'm already moving into my slides. So I discovered that basically the Nigerian education system is not or doesn't equip you to actually, think critically. It doesn't equip. And I say this with all sense of gravity. The way it appears is that we have doubled down so much on the markers of success, like the A's, the A's, what's it called, the awards, the prizes, and all of that, the positions in class, that we do not really test to be sure that the students have really understood what they've learned. And then our culture also engenders this. Our culture is not a culture that really smiles on asking so many questions. So if a student begins to ask questions, then people get offended. I remember when I was in Warri as a secondary school student, I would basically get my answer script and identify questions my teacher marked wrongly, and I'll take it back to them. I said, no, please, you have to adjust this. This answer is correct. And on many occasions, my teachers actually asked me to show them. So I showed them, and then at the end of the day, right, they gave me my scores, right? So I think that also helped me a bit, right, to get into that frame of mind where I was willing to question a whole lot of things. But the educational system doesn't do that for us on a general level. So the bulk of what we have been built into has been to accept the status quo, right? And that's why as undergraduates or even high school students, you find it very difficult for us to question things like Boyle's law or, Newton's law, or, like all those laws, all those equations, all those formulas that are found in mathematics, further maths, in physics. You can hardly hear a Nigerian student questioning those things. They seem like finality, like they have that sense of finality. But in the Western world, actually, students are always questioning those things. They're always trying to see whether those theorems really hold water or not, whether those laws are actually things that hold what's called the old water if they were put under different what's called pressures. So our educational system has compromised us on a very large level. I don't want to overflog that, but it's the norm. It's the norm. I don't want to overflog that, but it's the norm. Now, let me give you one very quick insight I came to discover. Now, I don't have statistics for this, so I need to put that disclaimer. But I've discovered that undergraduate studies hardly help us to even develop these skills. You know why? Because most undergraduate projects are not subjected to the most rigorous tests of scholarship. So most undergraduates, how do I call it, projects in Nigerian schools, most, I wouldn't say all, because I've not been in private schools, right? So I don't know how rigorous theirs could be, but at least I have some, some proof, but even though from a limited number of persons. There's a video I'm going to be showing us, sometime down the line during this course that helps. You'll be hearing from someone who graduated with the first class from Covenant University that joined our master class last year. So we also run critical thinking master classes, which are great. I mean, deeper dives into this matter. I mean, very, very deeper dives. So at the moment, she's schooling in the US. She's running her PhD, but she was able to see the gap in the way she thinks, right? Or in the way she thought when she got to the US, when she started having to interface with professors that had been used to their students practicing critical thinking. So by the time she took the master class, she was able to see a remarkable difference in how she was able to approach all the instances of, being questioned, like being asked to identify the logical failures of some certain, submissions and all of that. So I don't know how the private universities, how they run, but at least for a lot of, public universities or a lot of, government universities, I see that happening because first of all, there are too many students for one lecturer to supervise excellently well. So then we have things like, just going on the internet, just grabbing stuff and putting them in our projects reports and not referencing them as we ought to and all of that. And then we don't have software like Turnitin that helps to check for plagiarism. So the fact that there is no software that all our assignments go through, all our theses go through, the fact that there are no such software being used to actually check the accuracy or the the level of plagiarism that was that was done on a paper reduces the bar for the level of original thinking we want to do, since there is no penalization for it. All right. So that's something that our educational system has actually foisted on us. But we can't continue that way because now the global economy has made the world flat, like globalization has made the world flat. And right now, ideas rule the world. We are in the fourth industrial age where information is king, right? And in an information economy, ideas actually are the most critical and important, unit of the economy, right? So your ideas will be tested on how well thought out they are. So you might bring very rough ideas. The person who does the very intense work of refining the idea, of actually polishing it, of giving it a cutting edge, a sharp cutting edge, that person will be recognized before a person that produced or introduced the idea shabbily. And the truth is that the person who does it on a cutting edge level can even reference the person who did it on a very, very unpolished level. But the rewards, the bulk of the rewards will come to the person who did it on the refined level. And there are so many books there's so many historical books that can actually show this to be true. So we remember the story of Edison and some other man who said they discovered, the telephone at the same time, right? So one person had an entire team working with him. The other person had, I think he was tinkering by himself and all of that. But Thomas Edison had developed a process for ideating and patenting. So the moment he was able to ideate and they got a working prototype, they immediately went to the trademark office to patent their stuff. So they got the patent before the person who also was working on that idea at the same time. So the fourth industrial age, ideas set you apart. The level of thought, I can tell you. In fact, this happened to me recently. 2 nights ago, I was on a call with a Nigerian billionaire. And a friend of mine was talking with him, and then the man, so as they were talking together, the man was asking my friend some questions. So he needed someone to bring in another angle to it. This was around 10 p.m. Next thing was the call. I just got a call, and then I didn't even get any time to prepare. So as soon as I joined the call, the next thing was questions just started coming from him to me. So at that point, I now began to answer the questions. You know what the man said after I talked for like 10 minutes? It was like amazing. What he said was, you guys are showing that you are a different breed of young men because you've been able to put your answers in historical context. You've been able to show that you have an idea of the two sides of the coin, and you've been able to present this in such a logical manner. Now, when he said that, my head did not swell because it's like what it ought to be. That should be how we should think and speak. We should be able to put our thoughts or our ideas in historical context. Very important. Also, we should be able to ensure that we are not living with blind spots that we cannot see or with biases that we cannot put a spotlight on. We should always live with the idea that we have blind spots that others are most likely going to see before we see it. Okay? And what this does is that anytime you bring forth anything, even before somebody else wants to counter you, they already see that you have an idea, that there are other instances where what you're saying might not hold water, right? So you know it, you are conscious of it. You are not oblivious to that, all right? And that's what sets people apart in the fourth industrial age. The quality of your thoughts, the rigorous nature of the tests you have subjected your thoughts to. So this is more like a primer. So that's why we're just going to take these things. I'm going to set you on a journey. And for those who have been on the journey already, I'm going to give you language to pursue what you have been doing so far. And for those who feel like this will serve as a stepping stone to newer depths of thinking, I'm also going to be helping you with the scaffolding you need for that. And then the last thing is, when you are able to think well, I tell you, in this generation where herd mentality is already a new normal, HERD, particularly with the advent of social media. So there is an increasing manifestation of herd mentality where people believe what is most vocal, what is most visible, what is most popular. In this season, those who can stand apart from the crowd have given themselves a leverage that will obviously bring compounded returns. Now, let me say something very quickly. If you can think well, one of the things that you must also learn to do is to write well, or to speak well, because nobody will have an idea of the quality of your thinking if you refuse to have distribution channels for your thinking. I remember somebody on this call while he was introducing, or while he was talking about why he joined this particular course, he mentioned that he had been seeing the things I write, and he has been observing the quality of the thoughts behind it. He wouldn't have known about my quality of thinking if I refused to distribute that thinking as written words or as spoken words. So for you to leverage great thinking, you must have distribution channels for it. You must have distribution channels for great thinking. So these are more like, I've tried to create a sort of large framework that helps you to see the context in which this particular course is set. A disadvantage from the educational system. And another thing I must now tell you is that even the United States, the citizens are complaining about how dumbed down their education is. So the Nigerian educational system is not looking like what the American educational system is right now. But even the Americans themselves, many of them are complaining. So a lot of them are beginning to take their children out of schools to homeschool them. That's because they want to give their children the opportunity to experience independent thinking. They don't want that herd mentality where you are just indoctrinated and where you're just bombarded with a certain way of thinking that does not allow you to take a unique stand, as it were. So what it means is that if you are able to think very well, whether you are in Nigeria or whether you are outside Nigeria, it will always set you apart. It does not matter where you are from. And I'm glad that, I'm not speaking of this only from my experience in Nigeria. I have a lot of friends across the world, from South America, from North America, from other parts of Africa, and some parts of Europe. And the interesting thing I'm always getting from them, the feedback I'm always getting is, you think differently. You think differently. And I feel like this is not something, it's not meant to be special. It's meant to be what every one of us are able to do consistently. So journey with me. Critical thinking. So let's define it. So Paul and Elder defined critical thinking as self-directed, self-disciplined, self-monitored, and self-corrective thinking. Very important. Now, this is a very easy way of defining it. I have another definition, but let me come back to this particular simple definition. So critical thinking is self-directed, meaning you must take responsibility for thinking in a critical way. You can't outsource critical thinking. You cannot outsource it. You can outsource a host of things. You can outsource, cooking your food. You can outsource, somebody to write something for you. You can outsource, yes, you can outsource quite a number of things. You can outsource bookkeeping and all of those things. But thinking, you can outsource it. In fact, if you gather together the brightest minds right now and you tell them to start sharing with you their thoughts about some certain concepts, at the end of the day, you are still responsible for which ones you will finally accept. So critical thinking is self-directed. You must own responsibility for thinking and for thinking in the direction of critical thinking. Number two, it is self-disciplined. That's the truth. So one of the ways I strengthen my mind in being able to think of concepts for very long in my mind without losing the train of thought is I do mental mathematics. So I can just decide that, okay, let me calculate, 50 times 22, plus 25 divided by 10, right? So I try to do those things. I'm not on the level of all those math whizzes, but at least I do it to stretch my mind, to stretch how much I can hold a concept in my head at a stretch, all right? So it's self-disciplined. You have to be disciplined to be able to think critically. If you're not disciplined, if at the first encounter or the first experience of difficulty in what you're trying to think about, and then you just, throw up your hands and say, hey, I'm not cut out for this. I'm sorry, the next time you see some piece of news on Facebook, you might find yourself taking it in hook, line, and sinker because you have not trained yourself to always want to go the extra mile to analyze and to dissect a particular, thought or subject matter or something like that. Number 3 is self-monitored. So this is something that I've talked about at different times, but I feel like it's something that can be learned. How to be a spectator observer of your own life or the way you think or the way you react to things. So I discovered this around 2009. I discovered that I felt I could kind of like step outside myself and watch myself while I'm making decisions or watch myself while I'm interacting with people. So what's happening is that as I'm interacting with people, I'm also analyzing myself from multiple angles. So I'm able to do course correction or self-correction almost immediately. Wow. And self-corrective thinking. That's the last part of that definition. This is by Paul Elder, right? Paul and Elder are two very, very amazing minds when it comes to critical thinking. They are the founders of the Foundation for Critical Thinking. Now, self-monitored means that I can observe myself so I can be talking with you right now, and it's like, how many of you have heard of the self-driving car? The self-driving car. The self-driving car has many sensors all over it. It has cameras and sensors and all of that. So what that car does is that it is monitoring its interaction with the environment, right? And it is taking in all that information to adjust itself. So it can correct itself, it can accelerate, it can slow down, it can come to a standstill, right? It can move to the right, move to the left, a whole host of things. It monitors itself so that it can correct itself. So you are in a conversation or you are thinking about something and you are able to both monitor and correct yourself immediately. So what it means is that you are almost doing your thinking in an agile manner, not a waterfall manner. So sorry, these are concepts that are, from project management, as it were, but I just need to bring it into this, into this conversation. So agile project management means that you are working in sprints. You are doing things within short periods of time so that you can have visible outcomes, visible progress. But in a waterfall manner, what you do is when you are done with one phase, before you move to the next phase, before you move to the next phase, and all of that. But in an agile manner, you can work in, like you can break down an entire task into units and see how many units you can work on at once, right? So whether units from even phase 4 can come into phase 1, because you can work on them at the same time, that kind of thing. So self-corrective is the final part of that, all right? So self-directed, self-disciplined, self-monitored, and self-corrective thinking. So, so this is the longer explanation of that. It is a process of analyzing, evaluating, and interpreting information in a logical, systematic, and objective manner. The truth is that we are all emotional human beings. We are all emotional beings. You cannot escape the emotional part of you. But when you begin to direct your thinking towards a critical manner, now critical not in a negative way now, right? You are constructively criticizing your thinking, right? When you begin to direct yourself to think that way, one of the things that you begin to watch out for very intentionally is your emotions. Your emotions. Your emotions most times may betray you when you need to introduce things to people in a logical, systematic, and objective manner, in a way that your biases are not baked into your thinking. Let me give you an analogy of that. All right, so imagine that we had to deal with, let me see a very good example. Imagine that you have to deal with the factors responsible for youth unemployment in Nigeria. The factors responsible for youth unemployment in Nigeria, for instance. Can you describe the factors responsible for youth unemployment? Now, that question, one of the things that question does is that if you are asked on a hot seat, the first response most often is not your best response. The first response is most often the one that has emotion tied into it. And that's why you see a lot of people when they go for, let's say, panel sessions and all of that, or a Q&A session, ask me anything session, they buy time with some, they could tell you, could you rephrase that question? What are they trying to do? They're trying to calm down their emotion so that they don't respond with the first thing that comes to their mind. They're trying to calm down their emotion. So they're asking, can you rephrase that? Or could you give a context to that question? Is it unemployment in relation to government policies, or is it unemployment in relation to education, or is it unemployment in relation to what's it called, like underemployment, right? So they could ask you questions to clarify, but what they are doing in that instance is to kind of like buy some time so that they can answer you more logically, all right? So it is the process of analyzing, evaluating, and interpreting information in a logical, systematic, and objective manner. And the truth is that it gets more difficult nowadays, because before now, if you were getting your information from, let's say, the Guardian newspaper or Tell newspaper or Guardian, you will feel like these are non-partisan newspapers. So I can be sure that whatever is written here has a high level of objectivity. So you can pull out your facts from there. But nowadays, almost every newspaper wants to sell. So most of them are already moving to sensationalism. So you can't even trust most newspapers or even TV stations and all of that. So these days require you to be able to analyze and then to evaluate and then to interpret information you get in a logical, systematic, and objective manner. I mean, a lot of things come into the picture when we talk about ethnicity. Our present context has shown us that there is a whole lot that is still needed to be done as far as critical thinking is concerned, where you are not overwhelmed or overtaken by emotions, that you ditch any sense of logic in how you think, right? So it involves using evidence and reasoning to form a well-reasoned judgment or conclusion about a particular issue or problem, right? It involves being open-minded. You have to be open-minded, considering multiple perspectives, questioning assumptions and biases, and making decisions based on the best available evidence. This is very crucial. If we have a populace that thinks critically and creatively, I tell you that in the space of 5 years, we will be a transformed nation. I mean, for those who are in Nigeria, we will basically be a transformed nation if we had people thinking critically and creatively across the board. And this does not respect your career, the legal profession, the medical profession, IT, information technology, all professions require this. All professions require this. And again, another thing I've discovered is that the level of innovation and invention in different fields is proportional to how much critical thinking and creative thinking the practitioners of that field actually exhibit. So for instance, how many medical doctors have we heard inventing things in Nigeria? I've forgotten the number of patents that have been filed between 1980 till date with the Nigerian Patent Office. But the first time I heard the number, it was a ridiculous number, very ridiculous. It was so low that I was like, wow. And this in a way makes it appear like we don't have research institutions, or we don't have people who are actually working in highly specialized fields where the possibility of being able to identify the pain points of the people that they serve, what the pain points are, and then doubling down to create solutions for them. I feel that this particular course, as you take it to heart, you will begin to spot what's it called, like innovations within processes, within systems, and within tools for your field. All right, so what are the steps to critical thinking, again, on a basic level? So the first thing is you need to identify the problem or question. Now, one of the first tests of critical thinking is to basically, and I'm going to give you a sample essay. When we were in secondary school, we used to answer comprehension passages. Now, the comprehension passages we're given in those days were very easy, right? They didn't put too much demand on us, right? But if you want to take the GRE or the GMAT, for instance, you would begin to see comprehension passages that really demand that your mind thinks. So one of the things is, what is the question this comprehension passage is asking me? What is the question it is asking? Or what is the question it is answering? So for instance, if I come across a Twitter thread, or I come across an essay, or I come across, a post, we remember in comprehension, you are always looking for the main point in every paragraph, or the main argument in every paragraph. There's always a main argument. So if you cannot identify the main argument, then you cannot probe whether that particular body of writing is actually true to the argument or not. Do you understand the picture? You won't even be able to know whether indeed that particular that particular body of work you're reading, whether it answers the question it assumes to be posing. You won't even know whether it answers it objectively, or whether it answers it, with its own biases baked in and stuff like that. So that's it. You have to be able to identify what the problem is. What is the problem, or what is the question? What is the main idea this thing is asking me? So let me give us a very quick example. Let's say we have a particular essay that is asking us, that is talking about gender equality or something like that, gender equality. And then the person is arguing and saying that at the moment, gender equality is a moot point, like it is something that people are practicing already and stuff. And then the person argues from paragraph 1 to paragraph 10, and you are like, okay, this actually sounds like, this sounds like something that, is plausible. Like, this is actually a very logical argument for this. But the question is, reading just one article is not enough to give you the best conclusion or judgment of a person's point of view or a person's submission. So the next thing is that you need to go gather information. So what are the other positions about gender equality in our generation? So you see some people are saying that, hey, gender equality has not been achieved. It is still like, we are in the dark ages and all of that. Okay, that's one argument. Some other person says that, hey, this thing has, become a means for just attacking people whenever they want to talk about, their agenda and all of that. So you also see another perspective. You're like, okay, interesting. So you keep gathering information. You read other essays for and against that point. And as you read, what you're able to now start doing is you're able to start also extracting the arguments of each, perspective. And you're writing them out, okay? So one of the things I do when I'm trying to understand concepts like this is basically to highlight, right? So I can highlight what I'm reading, and then extract the highlights, right? And then like put them side by side, not necessarily side by side, like list them out in order. And then I begin to look at each of the main points from the different articles I've read, and I'm evaluating them. So we're already going to the next point now. Now you are evaluating them. You are trying to see that which person of all these people has been as thorough as possible, which person has set what they are saying in historical perspective, which person has been able to also like set what they're saying in the proper context. Okay, so for instance, somebody will say, oh, in the olden days, there was less gender equality, this and that was happening. But the question is, how much information do we really have about the olden days compared to now, where information across the world is widely spread out? So is it possible that the information deluge of today is making us feel like we are having a problem that the olden world, generations ago did not have? Or was it because of the dearth of information in their age that made them appear like they didn't have the problem, right? So you're now putting things, so you're looking at those who are putting things in perspective. So just keep following me, because we're going to have assignments that you're going to, work on, as it were, to help you follow through with what we have said today. So you are now identifying those who have been able to put things in historical perspective, put them in context, right? And who have been able to also kind of like highlight the strongest arguments from opposing views. It is at this point you would actually get to know, okay, I think from all the arguments I've seen, from all the perspectives I've seen now, this perspective seems to be the most balanced one. And let's say that perspective is something like gender equality is more recognized today, or gender equality is more recognized today because of the level of education, because of a globalized world where cultures are, flowing into each other. For instance, the Western world does not have a culture of as much respect as, the African continent. So in the African continent, there is a great level of value placed on respect, honor, and all of those things, right? So, but in a globalized world right now, Western culture has, mixed with African culture. And so what was initially not considered to be a disadvantage is now being considered to be a disadvantage, right? So you are now able to arrive at a conclusion that is informed, considers things from many perspectives, and is able to extract the most compelling ones. So if somebody now asks you tomorrow, what's your perspective on gender equality? And then you share, the person will look at you and say, wait, how did you arrive at such a robust conclusion? It is because you have spent time analyzing information, like, first of all, you have identified what's the real problem people are trying to get at in this particular, topic, or in this particular, argument, or something like that. And you've been able to, since you've been able to identify what the main arguments are, you've gathered information that buttress all the sides, then you have been able to identify them in the context of history and the context of contemporary times. Now you can weigh each of them and see that, okay, which of these ones would most likely be an approach to this topic that at least works 80% of the time, compared to those that work maybe 50% of the time or 30% of the time. So you arrive at something more robust that still leaves room for other people to even upgrade it. All right, thank you. Sorry for that. Yeah, so as I was saying, after getting, after being able to explore stuff on a robust level like this, what happens is that from that time onwards, you will find that you will be able to give very informed contributions. You will be able to give very informed responses about different matters. And for those who have interacted with me on different levels, you would most likely find that when I share a particular matter, I am always preempting a possible argument. Like I'm always preempting the possibility of arguments, cropping up and all of that. And as soon as the arguments crop up, I'm able to answer the arguments or the particular questions that are being asked of me, right? So this is a very critical part of of critical thinking. Sorry, give me a minute. All right, so let's move forward quickly. So now, what are the examples of critical thinking in everyday life? I'm just bringing these examples for you to understand how you can apply, as it were. One of the most, and I need to underscore this, one of the most important areas you need to be able to evaluate, you need to apply critical thinking is in evaluating news sources. And I say this because we are unconsciously shaped by what we keep listening to or by what we keep consuming, right? So we need to be able to evaluate news sources or sources of information. And this particularly because our lives are not compartmentalized in that sense of the word, right? You might listen to this particular news. How many of you have experienced the WhatsApp broadcast stuff where people can send videos from 5 years ago to you as though it were happening today? How many people have experienced that? Where you are having to, what's it called? Yeah, you can just drop it in the chat. Thank you. So you are having to how do I call it? Like you're having to consider the deluge of information we get every day and knowing how to actually identify them. In fact, I don't know, but this is actually very interesting. If you go on, let's say LinkedIn, you get people concocting stuff, right? That is not true. And they write it as, content, and gullible people just, consume that. For instance, you have the same thing happening even with, what's it called? If you see people want to start businesses and all of that, you look through some of what they present to you and you know that, this does not check out. This does not check out. What's the logic behind this? You listen to the news or you read the news and you are wondering why people are saying something the way they are saying it, when indeed, if you were to just think 2 layers below that, you will discover that it does not hold water at all. So in being able to evaluate news sources across social media, Instagram and all of that, there is a level of healthy suspicion that critical thinking gives to you about everything you see. Critical thinking gives you a level of healthy suspicion about everything you see. And I think that we need to have that healthy dose of suspicion, where we are able to ask questions about virtually everything and anything until we are very certain that we are not the victims of misinformation and all of that, right? That's number one. Number two, at work, problem solving. If you can show me somebody who is able to logically break down a problem at work and give you a stepwise answer to that problem, that person in no time, in no time, in no time will rise up the ranks. I can say this again and again. Now, let me share one experience that happened. So years ago, I was at Victoria Island for a meeting. So there was this person that, I had met under other circumstances before. And the way she related with some certain young people, right, left so much to be desired, right? So that very day, we now met in a business setting. So it was my turn to go to the flipboard and to state my thoughts about what we're trying to solve. So I got to the flipboard, took the marker, and began to break down, analyze every component of that problem and the stepwise way to solve it. Do you know what happened after that? The moment I was going to sit down, the way she looked at me was like, Abi, I can't believe this. So throughout that meeting, anytime I indicated I wanted to talk, she will be the first one to say, hey, sorry, JD wants to talk, JD wants to talk. So at that point, she suddenly saw that, hey, this person's contribution is of premium importance to any progress we want to make at this time. And after that period, it didn't matter anywhere she saw me. It was always with that sense of great joy, great excitement. And it was all because I was able to show that it is possible to lay out your thoughts in your head. It's possible to actually be able to break down a problem by analyzing the problem. Because sometimes if a problem is posed to you, sometimes that's not the main problem. Sometimes it is 3 other problems before you get to the real problem. So for a person who is able to demystify the 3 other problems, then you simply just, set yourself apart, right? So what I shared here, steps to critical thinking, basically helps you to be able to attack or approach any problem at work, anyone at all, anyone at all. And anyone at all. I'm smiling because, whenever I remember examples of some of the incidents that have happened where this was exemplified in my life, I smile, or I smile because it's just the best way to live. It's like magic, right? It's like one of the greatest ways to get the spotlight on yourself. And I'm saying this in the sense that really anybody diligent at their work should not be hidden from view, right? Anyone who is able to bring all that brain power, all that mind power, right, to bear on problems should not be kept in the dark. They should actually get their seat at the table, all right? So that's it. So for everybody on this call, whether you're self-employed or you're working in a business or you're even a student, when I was a student, the reason why I had very good grades, even though I wasn't constant in class, was because I used to answer exam questions or test questions this way. I knew that most lecturers will prefer you to give them exactly how they gave it to you, right? So after I read my notes, or after I read my notes on the manuals, in the exam, I will write out what the lecturer gave us. Then I will go on to say, in other words, I will now write it out the way I understood it. So what happened was I was always acing those exams, even though I wasn't in class. I'm not saying be like me in that regard, please, right? I'm just saying that sometimes I could be in class for just 5 times in a semester, and yet I will come out with very exceptional grades, right? And that was because I had been able to grow that capability to break down the concept being taught or that the lecturer was trying to pass across. So I could write it in my words. So what happened was this. If it was the lecturer that was reading my exam script and marking it, he would realize that this is an exceptional student. I need to give this guy, like all the marks that, the maximum marks I can give him. If the lecturer gave the script to students to mark for him, and he has a marking scheme that they are using, I will still pass. Like, I will still get the highest level of marks, because based on the marking scheme, I will still be correct. Do you understand the picture? So I applied that, as as a student. So for a self-employed person, it is your clients that are looking for you to be able to break down their challenges, to break it down to the most, to make them see that you understand their problems more than they even do, right? There is no client who gets to see that you actually understand their problems more than they do, that would not feel like you have the best solution for them. Because if you understand the problem that much, then why would they go and look for another person to help them solve it? And then for you who is working with an employer, the moment the way you think begins to save money for your employer, begins to open up new streams of income, begins to save time, begins to make processes more efficient, I can assure you that you will become a prized asset. In fact, I know people that go back to negotiate salaries based on these skills. They go back to negotiate their salaries, because the moment they begin to bring these skills to the fore, then they become almost indispensable at work, right? And so their boss will do anything to keep them, all right? Then finally making purchasing decisions. And this is across the board. This is across the board. A lot of times you have limited amount of money, and then you have many things to purchase. So when you apply critical thinking, for instance, let's say you're looking at, I have the money to buy a car, or the money to, to buy a landed property. Now, in making this decision, as I said, emotions might make you choose one, maybe because of your lived experiences. If, for instance, your family, it took time before they could buy a land for them to, build their house, you might find it difficult to actually choose to buy a car. You might want to go buy a land immediately, because the way you were brought up had made you see the deprivation or the challenges that came with not having your own personal property. But in that instance, is that the best choice? Many a times it is not. Many a times it is not. So when you sit down, and we're going to talk about that very shortly. We have limited time already, but we're going to still try to touch that very shortly. So to analyze again, we're going to talk about that in decision making. I do this once in a while, because again, as I said, a lot of these things, I do them in my head, but there are times you need to actually write them out. So when you want to make a purchasing decision like this, imagine that you now get a sheet of paper, divide it into two, then let's say buy a car. You put the pros on one side, you put the cons on one side, right? You put the advantages of buying a car now on one side, the disadvantages on one side. Then you also open another sheet, get the landed property. One side you have advantages, the other side, disadvantages. Now, so I'm already jumping into decision making already. Now, give each of these points under advantage and disadvantage, give them points. So let's say one can be 5 points, another can be 2 points, depending on the severity of the advantage it is, or the disadvantages or the advantage it is. So when you now weigh them, now calculate under advantages. Now, this time you are not bringing emotions into the picture. But not that you'll be able to totally eliminate emotions, but you are ensuring that you are as logical and systematic as possible. So you have done it. Okay, if I have a car, mobility will be assured. I would be able to I'll be able to explore places that I've always wanted to explore. I won't have to consider my movement when rain is falling, right? Like, rain has always been stopping me over time from going to places where I wanted to go at the right time. But if I have a car, the rain factor will be taken away. So you line them up like that. And then you line up the disadvantages as well. Okay, if I have a car right now, what if a fault develops in the first month? Do I have sufficient funds to maintain my car, right? So you have them pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages. By the time you do this, most likely the decision you now come to at the end of the day will be the most defensible decision. So if you go for, let's say, buying a landed property, and then you now see a friend of yours who just got a car, you won't feel under any pressure at all, right? Somebody will not tell you that, I heard that you just got some money, like, why didn't you get a car? You won't feel you need to defend yourself. You'll say, I don't think it's time to buy a car yet. But many times, the reason why we feel under pressure about the opinions of people is because the basis for the decisions we made were not logical enough. We didn't convince ourselves. We only made those decisions emotionally. So we didn't persuade ourselves with logic that this is the best decision to make now. And it is because of this and this and this and this and this. So when people now begin to put pressure on us and all of that, we cave in. We cannot defend why we did what we did. All right. So these are 3 examples in everyday life. So let's go to analyzing information as a part of critical thinking. So the first, and I've already mentioned this when I was talking about steps to critical thinking, right? I've already mentioned that. So the first thing is to identify arguments. Every piece of information that is meaningful has an argument it is pushing, right? It has an argument it is pushing. It doesn't matter where you find it. So somebody can put something on a what's called a status, WhatsApp stories, and say, I'm selling land for ₦1 million, and you're going to get, if you buy land with me, you're going to get ₦5 million in return or something like that in 2 years. Now, that's a post that presupposes a reason, a basis. Who is that post for? It is for, I think, most likely a naive person that expects that a land of 1 million will become 5 million, right? In, let's say, 1 year or 2 years. If you even say a land of 3 million, 4 million will become a land of 5 million, 6 million in 2 years, it's feasible. But an appreciation of 4 million naira on a piece of land in 2 years, except you know something I don't know. Is it that there is gold under the land in that area? Is that what you know that I don't know? Now, do you see that post, I am reading it and I'm already asking questions. I'm already trying to understand what is the basis behind this particular post. So somebody else can look at that post and say, wow, Kai, opportunity to make money. If I have 1 million naira right now, I'm going to make 5 million naira in 2 years. But I'm asking, wait, what's the logic? What's the presupposition? What's the premise? What is this person saying that I have not gotten? Or what does this person know that I don't know? So those are questions, and I tell you most times, those questions, you don't even know when you begin to think them, when you have trained yourself well in critical thinking. It's like reflex. You're already like a 1,000,001 questions are already running through your mind. So you now take them one by one and begin to probe that thing. So you can now go to the inbox of the person and say, hey, I saw this, your post. Is there something you know I don't know? Right? Can you tell me what are the projections of landed property in that vicinity? What are the historical antecedents? Has there been a jump of this level before? Okay, so has there been any time when a land of, let's say, 200,000 became 1 million naira in 2 years in this place? What were the factors? Now, those, are you getting the picture now? Remember, we're talking about analyzing information. So you are probing to identify, right, the statements or the reasons for the claims the person is making. You are asking questions. Obviously, a WhatsApp story, a singular WhatsApp story, will not have all of these things in itself. But let's say you are reading a book. Somebody wrote a book about how 9-to-5 jobs are dead, right? And you pick that book, it's 300 pages. Actually, the title should tell you what the real argument is, and the entire book should actually be trying to convince you about the perspective the title is pushing. Or you can start reading that book and discover that, no, this person has another agenda. Like, this person is basically a climate activist that is trying to reduce how many cars are on the road. That's the real argument the person has in the book, not that 9-to-5 is really, really dead. Do you get the picture? So if you are not able to identify the arguments, what happens is that you come to erroneous conclusions about information you absorb. You come to erroneous conclusions. And if you cannot analyze and identify arguments, most likely, if the person is up to mischief, if the person who put out that content is up to mischief, then you will have been gullibly, captured. You will have been, you will have just, swallowed everything hook, line, and sinker. All right. So an argument is a set of reasons presented to support a conclusion. But what's the main goal of what this person has said? What are the basis for this thing this person is trying to achieve? What's the basis? So let me give an instance. How many of you heard of the recent climate change uproar, right? And how that the Western world is trying to get the African continent to sign a charter that they are going to stop using fossil fuels by a certain time and all of that. Now, the way it was painted like, this is inevitable, it will happen. But the question is, does the Western world have an ulterior motive? Why are they telling us to actually stop using fossil fuels when the combined total of fossil fuels we use in Africa is not anywhere near, I think, what is used in Europe and America, right? So why are they asking us to do that? Why don't they slam the brakes on their use of fossil fuels as an example to Africa, so that if Africa sees this, Africa can now follow suit? Now, I'm just trying to say that when we read things like that, when we come across information like that, we need to be able to, sometimes I read stuff and then I just burst into laughter, because the person might have tried very shrewdly to hide the ulterior motive within what they are writing. But the moment I catch it, I just start laughing. And then I'm like, this thing most likely will go over the head of so many people. So many people will not be able to identify these fallacious arguments, as it were, right? But it is imperative that we learn how to analyze information by identifying the arguments. So here you have, to identify an argument, look for statements that provide evidence or reasons for a particular claim. Somebody could tell you that 35% of women are this and that and that. The question is there a piece of information that is being withheld from us? So somebody says 35% of women, and then the study was only carried out in Canada, and the person is extrapolating all that data to reflect every woman in the world. That's fallacious. You can't use the reality of Canadian women to judge what happens with Ethiopian women. Do you understand the picture? So there are times when, in fact, don't mind me. There are times when I see a Facebook post and I see something somebody has written, or I see a LinkedIn post. I copy a paragraph or a part of that stuff and I put it on Google to check if that data is correct or not. And at times you just like, oh no, why would this person do this? This is not good, as it were. So, but you see, for you to be able to say this is not good for somebody else, you also must must actually have embraced intellectual honesty. So that's another thing we teach during our master class, intellectual honesty. There are some particular ethics around thinking, like thinking well. And these ethics, include intellectual integrity, intellectual honesty, and all of that, right? So you need to look for the statements that provide evidence or reasons for a particular claim. And most often, these words are used to actually project that an argument is being pushed forward. So women are, what's it called? Women are, let me see one of those things that they say. Women are emotional because they always cry. I mean, that's very fallacious, because men who don't cry kept hearing from their childhood that real men don't cry. That's why they don't cry. But does it mean they are not emotional? They're emotional. So crying is not the evidence of emotions. Crying is not the evidence of emotions. It is only an outlet for emotions. So if many men have chosen not to express their emotions through crying, does it now mean they are not emotional? Do you understand the picture? All right. So these words, because, therefore, since, there's some other words you can find. Let's say if is also a statement of conditionality and all of that, right? So you see these words and you see them in a particular body of work. Please pay more attention to it, than ever, to try and this it. If you practice this thing conscientiously for about 3 months, it soon becomes a habit. You won't even know that you are practicing it. So the moment somebody sends something to you, or you read something, or you see a movie, or you see a TV show, or you're looking at a documentary, your mind is already like subconsciously processing all these things and pursuing an unraveling of them till you arrive at what is actually being, being projected. Another way to analyze information is to distinguish between facts and opinions. So facts are objective statements that can be proven or verified. The scientific method actually helps with facts. The scientific methods. Have experiments been carried out about this stuff? Or what are the statistical evidences for this, right? Is this a universally occurring stuff, or is it limited to just this part of the world? Is context taken into consideration here? For instance, imagine that somebody would say, people don't love going to offices anymore because after the COVID pandemic, people didn't want to return to the offices. Now, if it was 2 months after the pandemic, after the lockdowns, obviously, if you have been under lockdown for 7 months, if after the second 2 months of the lockdown being over, you don't feel like going to the office, it doesn't still mean that people don't want to go to the office. Reason is that we are what's it called? We are humans of habits. We are products of habits, or we are beings of habits. If you have been at home for 7 months, to suddenly get up and start going to the office every day will require sufficient external force to push you. So you will find that people may first drag their feet and say, I'm not interested in going to work and all of that. But after people get used to going out again, you might find that people are now like, why should I be stuck? Or why should I stay at home for 7 hours, 8 hours? Why don't I go to work where I can talk with my colleagues? Then you might now see that the numbers might now level out at, let's say, 50-50. So if it is 50-50, then you would be able to now say that about 50% of workers would rather stay at home, would rather work from home than work in the office. Now you've allowed a fact to arrive, to rise out of what was previously an opinion, right? So facts can be verified. You have 2 or 3 witnesses across the board. You go on, let's say, and this is another thing I do a lot. I prefer to actually get my facts from journals, right? Publications, books, instead of just articles and posts. Reason being that if you're going to write a book, you have an editor that helps to check for factual accuracy. And if you're going to write if you're going to publish an article in a journal, you will also be vetted. So there's higher likelihood of the things shared in a journal or a book, there's the greater likelihood of them being factual than something you see on a website that you can't even trace its pedigree or its antecedents. A website that does not have like evidence of how do I explain? That doesn't have evidence of serious following. That doesn't have evidence of. So let me give an instance. Imagine a site that just came up 1 year ago, and then has been putting out stuff, and you are not seeing people quote things from that website. Then you may want to be careful about the content. In fact, because of the business I do, we know what people do with journalism. Like some people can go create they can go create a website that is meant to spread disinformation or misinformation. They will just share the news with a low-level journalist who is looking to break the next sensational news. Just share it, and then that one, as soon as that one shares it, many blogs will begin to pick it up. And as the blogs are picking it up, then it's spread on social media. Then the next thing is big newspapers might now feel like, what are we missing out on? Why? I mean, hope we are not missing out on a breaking news that we should be the ones on top of it. So a lot of times, those smaller ones are most likely going to be, how I call it, like sources of disinformation, as it were. So you want to be careful about those ones. Opinions are subjective statements that reflect personal beliefs or feelings. Yes, opinions. And that's why even for those who are religious, you have to be able to introduce logic into your faith. If not, people will assume that you are just telling them that, hey, just do this because I told you so. You must be able to, with antecedents, historical antecedents, you must be able to, with verifiable facts about people that have maybe journeyed through what you're trying to tell these people, and you can show it across not only your own continent, but other continents. At least those ones, to a large degree, show that you are not just trying to get people to just accept what you're saying without actually going to test for themselves, or without looking for things to back up what you're saying, as it were. So to distinguish between facts and opinions, look for evidence to support a statement and consider whether the statement can be objectively verified. Very important. So what's my opinion, for instance? Somebody can say that, imagine that somebody saying one tribe is more intelligent than another tribe. And let's say with all boldness and confidence that this tribe is more intelligent than this tribe. That's an opinion. Where is it? Where can we find it? Where can we see it? There's nowhere. We can't see any proof that this tribe is more intelligent than this tribe. There's no proof. It can't be verified. Do you understand the picture? So, and a lot of times, and we're going to talk about fallacies, as it were, logical fallacies, but our time is already, far spent. But let me quickly talk about evaluating sources of information before we now move to logical fallacies. So we've talked about sources of information can include books, articles, websites, and other media. To evaluate a source, consider the author's credentials. Very important. The accuracy of the information presented and whether the source has a bias or agenda. So consistently, these things are very crucial. Let me explain to you. How does this work when you are in when you are problem solving in your office. Do you realize that if I were working in an organization that had, let's say, I'm still in a junior rank, and I get invited to a session where we are discussing strategy. We're trying to problem solve around a particular strategy. If I know I have seniors in that place, the first thing is I will keep quiet to know what their biases are. As they talk, I begin to identify their biases. Okay, this person is talking to protect themselves. This person is talking so that they will not seem to be dull. So you're looking at the biases that is making them talk. This person is talking, and the person is just more of, okay, we want this business to actually succeed. So you've been able to identify the three perspectives or the three places these people are coming from. Somebody is trying to protect himself, doesn't want to be sacked or something like that. This other person is trying to ensure that, what's it called? This other person is trying to ensure that they don't look bad, right? They don't look bad. So they are always staying in the middle. This other person is saying, we want the best for the business. Now, when you want to answer, do you know that you can actually answer each of those biases in a way that empowers them to agree to your own answer? The way, for instance, thank you everybody for the opportunity for me to share my thoughts around this. So considering this strategy, these are the possible challenges it could throw up before us. And we need to address these challenges within the solution we come up with. So for instance, introducing AI into our company could possibly pose threats to some of our workers. And these threats can actually be mitigated if we can show that AI is a complement to the human, instead of a competition, right? And again, AI can help you extend your capabilities, right? It can get you to be more efficient, get you to be more, get you to have intelligent thoughts, as it were, and stuff like that. And in the final analysis, all of these things would drive us towards a prosperous business. So these are the solutions I have in mind. Then you begin to break down the solutions. What you have done basically, because you were able to evaluate the biases behind the information people were throwing up, was that you were able to quell their fears and get them to be on your side. So when you now pose that solution, instead of you having antagonists that will be attacking what you have said, you will find them actually lining up behind you and say, yes, that's what we are talking about. Yes, that's it. We want to ensure that it does not threaten anybody's job. We need to ensure that it in fact, helps our people to be more efficient. So because you've been able to identify those biases, you were able to resolve them before it needed to even be used to attack you, all right? So evaluating sources of information, evaluate multiple sources to get a well-rounded view of the topic and to identify potential biases or inaccuracies. Very important. Particularly with things that actually touch your emotions. There was this particular news about Facebook when Facebook was hacked or was used by Russia to actually influence the American elections in 2016, I think so. So there was a scandal called the Cambridge Analytica scandal. What they did was Russians bots, they deployed many bots like BOTS on Facebook that were using that to target posts and ads to people of a certain profile, such that these people, the moment they read those posts, they will keep clicking on links that were similar to that post. And so it will put them in an echo chamber where the only thing they were hearing were sentiments that aligned with the ones they held most dear to their hearts, the most emotional parts of the sentiment were now the things they were listening to again and again until they felt like there was no other point of view to see things from. In our world today, echo chambers are very easy to create. And that's why you need to use multiple sources. Sometimes when you're trying to get multiple sources, I've had instances where I felt like I had jumped on a particular line of thought that was really going to be massive. But when I started to do research on it, when I started looking at different people's views about it, I discovered that the premise was flawed. So I had to, sacrifice my sacred cows, that kind of thing, right? So this is very important to evaluate information. All right, I think because of time, I might want us to just, pause here today, and we'll continue tomorrow. Please, we'll start immediately on the dot by 4 tomorrow. But an assignment will be sent to us on the chat this evening that we'll just, walk through before tomorrow. Basically, the last day of this will be more for practicals. We're going to be grouped into small groups where we're going to walk through some problems together, fusing both critical thinking and creative thinking together to solve some certain problems. We'll do that on Friday. But critical thinking is the more intense part of this particular program. Creative thinking is far easier to grasp because of the fact that we are innately built to be creative. But sometimes it's hard to be critical, right? That kind of thing. So we're going to be moving to logical fallacies tomorrow, but I believe that you've been able to, get your mind challenged already, been able to start seeing angles to the way to think, to the way to approach things that are not, they are not going to be easy on you. I mean, these things I've just listed, they are not going to lend themselves to just, like a walk. They are not going to be a walk in the park. You're going to have to apply yourself to it. So let me go back to that definition of critical thinking I mentioned. It is self-directed, self-disciplined, self-monitored, and self-corrective. You need to embrace all 4 of these for you to actually come into that place where consistently, without an iota of doubt, you are actually practicing critical thinking. All right. So we'll end here. If there are any questions, you can drop them in the chats, like on WhatsApp, and then I'll try to attend to them through voice notes. So at least you have ways to clarify them before our concluding part of this class tomorrow. Thank you so much. Is Funto there?
Yes, I'm here, sir. Thank you so much for the class. Thank you everybody for staying through to the end of this class. Just as Mr. JD mentioned, an assignment will be shared on the group before the day is over. And this is where we draw the curtain for today's class. If you have any question, please do well to drop your questions on the group. Right, yes, drop your questions on the group and we'll attend to it. Maybe first thing in the class tomorrow after these 3 days, so you don't waste any more time, right? All right, everybody, do have a lovely evening. See you on the group where our conversation continues. Bye.